Now, once again, Raymond Arroyo.
Welcome back to The World Over. My next guest found true happiness chronicling her journey on a blog called conversiondiary.com. But that isn't the whole story. She started out as an atheist who longed for something beyond the tangible. She's the author of a new memoir entitled Something Other Than God: How I Passionately Sought Happiness and Accidentally Found It. She recently joined me in studio. Here's my interview with Jennifer Fulwiler. Tell me about this title, Something Other Than God. This is a C.S. Lewis derivative.
It is.
Tell me about it.
It is. So as I was writing this book, initially I thought that this was just a story about finding God. But after I wrote my first draft, something was missing. The facts were there, but there's something missing from the story. And I realized it was ultimately a story about finding happiness, because I'd been the search for happiness had been driving me. So I came across this wonderful quote from C.S. Lewis, a fellow former atheist, who says, "All that we call human history is the long, terrible story of man trying to find something other than God, which will make him happy." So as soon as I heard that, and knowing it was a quest for happiness, I had my title, Something Other Than God.
Tell me, there's something that happens very early on. You're on a fossil hunt.
Yes.
And that moment kind of sets the course, begins this journey. Tell me about that.
What happened was, I was an amateur paleontologist, even as a child. My family owned some land, and in our part of Texas, it's rich with fossils. It used to be a shallow ocean, so tons of fossils there. And I had always gone hunting for fossils. I was an atheist child, and I'd always gone looking for these fossils, and I always thought of them as, these are the dead things, and I'm the alive thing, and this is just my paradigm. This is always how it will be. And one day, when I was late in elementary school, at a pretty young age to realize this, but I suddenly held a fossil in my hand and realized my fate was no different than its own. That time would wash over me, and I would die, and I would be gone. And that was the first moment in my life where it really hit me, kind of the meaninglessness behind my atheist worldview.
What a cheery child you were.
Great way to start a book, right?
Yeah, Morticia Adams, you know, a little scary. Tell me, you find C.S. Lewis. Now, you were an atheist, an affirmed atheist.
Very much.
How did you stumble into C.S. Lewis?
Well, that was, I had already begun the conversion process by the time I found C.S. Lewis. And he spoke my language. I tried to read all these other books by brilliant people who were lifelong believers, and we just missed each other. It was like we were speaking a different language. So C.S. Lewis, as a former atheist, could speak my language.
Why did you decide to blog about this in public? I mean, of all the things
Why
to
not,
blog
Raymond?
about, it's so intimate. It's personal. It's, you know, you're wrestling with things that are so deeply held. But then, the world of faith beyond it. Why did you decide to open it up to other people?
It came naturally to me. First of all, I had a background as a web developer, so you know I'm one of those people. I was always online. But the other thing is, I mean, this
spiritual exhibition. I know. Is what I call it.
You know, actually, you know what I think it was more than that, because I was anonymous at first. I just went by the name Jennifer F. I did not know any Christians. You know, when you're a loudmouth atheist, you don't tend to have a great circle of faithful believers. So who am I going to ask these questions to? I couldn't ask my atheist friends.
Now, you did something interesting. You kind of begin a short-term experiment in Catholicism, once you find Catholicism. And you sort of put your feet in. Tell me about that. Why a little trial period for, what was it, a month?
No, it was a couple of months where basically I realized, I got my first clue that God is not just something you read about in the pages of a book, oddly enough. That was actually news to me. I really thought that God was going to be a concept, that I would decide whether I believed in this concept or not. And it finally clicked for me that that's not how it works, that God is a being. He is a living person, and that I will not be able to connect with him if I don't put my heart in this as well. And so thanks to Lewis, I realized that God is the source of all that is good. And if that is true, then the moral code he gives us through his church must be the path to goodness. So I tried out that moral code. I thought, okay, I'm going to live by the teachings of the Catholic Church, and we'll see if it brings more goodness into my life.
Well, and like Lewis, there's a little hiccup here in the action because pain enters into this story, a little suffering. You realize you have this blood clot disorder.
Right.
And you're pregnant,
Yes.
which could be lethal.
Yes.
Tell me about that and how that refined your faith.
Okay,
or brought it out.
It did. So I had a deep vein thrombosis, which is a blood clot in a major vein. They can be fatal if it detaches and
moves,
goes to your lungs. Yeah, it's very bad. And it was caused by a genetic clotting disorder, and that is exacerbated by pregnancy. So suddenly, I wasn't even Catholic yet, and I have all of these doctors saying you must be sterilized. It is the only course of action, or you must use artificial contraception. And suddenly, it put me face to face with the question of, do the rules of the Catholic Church, these rules that are so maligned in popular culture, do they really matter? Do I believe that they are true enough to make great sacrifices to follow them?
There was a great line that you mentioned that your father, I guess, imparted to you, and it was, never believe something because it's convenient or because it makes you feel good. Ask yourself, is it true? Did that become kind of a guidepost for you?
Very much. I mean, I often say that the way of thinking that I learned as a young atheist, it very much brought me to Catholicism because I was trained to seek truth above all. And that mentality directly led me to the foot of the Catholic Church.
What was the biggest challenge, the biggest obstacle for you?
I will say, honestly, it was this concept that God is a person. I could even follow the rules, even at the pain of sacrifice, but coming from that atheistic perspective, to have a relationship with someone you can't see is very difficult.
There's one part in the book you talk about visiting a cemetery and having a major revelation there. I'm from New Orleans, and we love our cemeteries.
Oh, yes.
And cemeteries are a thing of beauty. What was it there that, what light went on when you visited the cemetery?
So this is a cemetery where many of my ancestors are buried. My ancestors were crazy enough to come to Texas in the 1850s. So I was there to see my ancestors. So many of these graves are people I'm related to. And I always assumed that it was all adults at the cemetery. I had only seen their names. And while I was walking around one day, I looked at the dates and I realized half of the people here are children. It's practically a children's graveyard. And to think of these people who share my genetic material, they're my ancestors, to think of how many children they lost, it made me realize that my current worldview very much rested on having good health and longevity. And I thought, does my current worldview stand up when you lose it all, when you end up surrounded by the graves of children?
There was another moment in the book that I found a little odd, Jennifer. I have to bring this up.
Be honest.
I have to be honest. At one point, you pray not for Ella Fitzgerald, not for Frank Sinatra, not for Irving Berlin, for Tupac Shakur.
Yes.
Now, who am I to judge? But, as somebody famously said, but why Tupac Shakur? What was this all about?
Okay, to this day, I will say that his music, not all of it, but a lot of his music resonates with me. Honestly, he is one of the more pro-life musicians that we've ever had. He has lyrics where he decries the horror of abortion and of crimes against humanity. The reason why he resonated with me is many of his songs, not the popular ones, but many of his songs, he was acutely aware of evil. And much like C.S. Lewis, he is someone who couldn't let it go, who couldn't live his life and be comfortable knowing that horrors were being committed in the world every day. And that really struck me, and I really felt a connection to him in that sense.
What do you think is the biggest block, if you will, to communication as well as understanding between this ever-growing atheistic chic that's out there? And let's face it, there are a lot of, I know a lot of young people, I have friends who are atheists because it's cool to be an atheist.
It's very cool.
How do you engage that in a way that isn't tired or trite and that really is effective?
I think you really have to engage. This sounds trite, but it's not. You have to engage with each person on an individual level, and especially if they are saying something about your faith that's offensive. It's tempting to get defensive and to try to show them how smart you are and to be combative. Yeah, exactly. I think it's so important to see what's good about them and to compliment them. For example, if your nephew's spouting off, say, you know, you are so smart. Like, you really have a keen mind. And I love it that you're asking these questions rather than saying, in your face, you're wrong, let me tell you about this doctrine. Yeah. Because it's very easy to get defensive, because let's face it, the culture doesn't like Catholicism very much.
Is apologetics played out using scripture verses to prove? Is it played out, yes or no?
It's played out.
Thank you for being honest.
Thank you for asking that question.
Yeah, no, I tend to agree with you, because I think, particularly after reading your book, you realize that's not what really convinces or draws people. It is always witness. It's always the lived life, the life well lived.
Right.
You know, I can remember my wife. I mean, part of the thing that drew my wife, she saw Mother Teresa, met Mother Teresa.
Right.
That is one of those moments that you just don't shake.
Right.
And you've got to keep asking yourself, why would this woman do this and that and give so much of herself for years, helping these horribly disfigured, poor, dirty people, and yet embracing every moment, because she wasn't doing it for them.
Right.
She was doing it for them, but beyond them as well.
Right.
And anyway, as I read it, I kept thinking, the apologetics thing really doesn't enter into this story.
It doesn't. I actually had people, you specifically mentioned the Bible verse thing. I went to a very religious college to begin with. I transferred away because it was too religious. And people would actually quote scripture at me, and I wanted to say, like, but I think it's fiction. Like, why are you talking to me about the Bible? I don't think it's inspired. That's irrelevant to me. And they weren't, again, like we said earlier, C.S. Lewis spoke my language. They weren't speaking my language. That was not the paradigm through which I saw the world.
Very interesting. No, well, I think for those with a literate background and those who really know the Bible, that can be an effective approach. But I think by and large, and today, I just don't think it's effective.
It's not.
I think the apologetics
not for atheists
is done. Yeah. What's the hardest part of Catholicism, having come in?
Oh, wow. I
True
think,
confessions here, Jennifer Fulwiler.
Okay, true confessions. I think it is hard to be Catholic in this culture because my life is a lot harder than it was before I was Catholic.
In what way?
I have 6 kids. We live in a 3-bedroom house. I have this blood clotting disorder. I actually almost died in my last pregnancy. So those doctors who told me I shouldn't have any more kids, they're kind of right. And so, you know, keeping true to the Church's teaching about, you know, the beauty of the theology of the body and openness to life. I mean, it's all wonderful, and it's also a cross. It's difficult. And I'm overjoyed to be Catholic. Never for a single minute do I miss my old way of life. But this is a hard life that we live as Catholics.
Is it the people that make it hard?
What?
Do the people in the Church make it hard to come to the Church and stay in the Church? Were they an obstacle in your path?
No, actually they weren't initially. And that is where, you know, having that blog I think really helped. I had this wonderful group of Catholic
supportive
readers.
Group.
They're very supportive, very helpful. Of course, I have had, you know, everyone. I mean, it's a fallen world. I mean, I have certainly encountered Catholics who challenge me, I guess you could say. But I will say, Raymond, this is the truth. Every time I go to an event full of faithful Catholics, I look around that room and I say, thank God I am on the right team. I finally found the right team.
Something Other Than God, How I Passionately Sought Happiness and Accidentally Found It by Jennifer is available at bookstores everywhere, as well as online and through the EWTN Religious Catalog.